We work towards educating and advocating for renewable energy and clean energy throughout the state of Alaska. Half of our staff works on STEM education, primarily in K through 12 classrooms. So we do classroom visits and teacher trainings and other sort of fun camps and programs and stuff. A couple of our educators are here tonight. And then the other part of what we do is advocacy, and that takes the shape in several different forms. One major thing we're working on is working with the rail belt utilities on connecting the grid from Homer to Fairbanks in a more efficient way. There's some exciting stuff going on right now that we're a part of. There's some legislation that was introduced at the end of last session that we've been working on, and there's some talks with the utilities on how we're gonna work together and kind of sharing electricity up and down the grid more efficiently. Some other advocacy work is financing that we're working on. A green bank is a major part of what we see as the future of financing for clean energy. Without grant funding, we think these green banks, which leverage private dollars or leverage public dollars with private dollars, is kind of the way forward for clean energy financing. We're also working in rural Alaska through the Alaska Wind Working Group and AEA program and the Islanded Grid Resource Center with some partners in Maine and Hawaii. And lastly, we celebrated, just a shout out for our 15th year anniversary. We celebrated our 15th year this year. We had a big party over at King Street Brewery, and we had Mayor Berkowitz, Senator Murkowski, and the former governor of Colorado, Bill Ritter, speaking with us, along with live auction and music and lots of beers and food and good times. And we do have a few copies left of Bill Ritter's book on the shelf over there, or on the table. We are giving those away today if you give a $20 donation to REAP. So if you want to pick up that book, Bill's working on lots of cool stuff and has lots of really interesting ideas. So definitely worth a look. Now on to tonight's evening. We like to hold these public events. The speaker series is something that we've done for a couple years now, and we did one in the spring, and we're happy to do one in the fall. We're really excited to be able to offer these for free for you, and we couldn't do that without our sponsors. So I'd like to thank our sponsorship first. Our leading sponsors are BP and the Municipality of Anchorage Solid Waste Services. Supporting sponsors are the Denali Commission, Doyon, Chugach Electric, Siri, the Alaska Center, and the Anchorage Museum is an in-kind sponsor giving us this space. We have got a good lineup of events this season. So in addition to this, we've got 3 more events coming up every other Thursday for October and November. October 24th, we're hosting an event called Building a Clean Energy Economy. And that's going to be a discussion with Gwen Holdman of ASEP, Chris Rose of REAP, and Isaac Vanderberg of Launch Alaska. They're going to be talking about how they work independently and how they work together on enhancing renewable energy and clean energy in Alaska through different facets. So research, development, and advocacy. So that'll be an interesting conversation. November 7th, we're going to be talking about the Railbelt Electric Grid that I mentioned our work on. And November 21st, we'll be talking about tidal energy. We'll get an update from Levi Kilcher of NREL, and we'll have a ORPC representative there as well. We're also looking to hold an event in Fairbanks in November, so keep an eye out for details on that. One last housekeeping item. So thank you for making it here. We're in the atrium, which is a new space for us. The rest of the events are going to be on the 4th floor of the museum. So they're still free. There's a gallery space up there that they offer for events. It's a nice open space, and yeah, you'll probably just go up the elevators there. So if you're looking to come to the other events, just head on up to the 4th floor. Again, check in at the front desk, and they're all free of charge, and we'll have food and drink available as well. So for tonight, I'm really excited about hearing about electric vehicles some more. Just out of curiosity, who was at the Clean Power Happy Hour 2 weeks ago? Just show of hands. Couple people. Clean Power Happy Hour? Couple people? Great. Well, this will be a great addition to that conversation. And you don't have to have been there to enjoy this one. But if you were there, this will kind of build off of some of what was talked there and dive into some more of the nitty gritty. Yeah, and going to that event and from getting ready for this event, it's pretty obvious to me that people are interested in electric vehicles. It seems pretty clear that electric vehicles are coming and headed our way. Everybody, all the major manufacturers are working on them. And some of the experts are saying that within 10 years, electric vehicles will be the only ones being produced. There will be no more internal combustion engines being produced within 10 years. That's maybe an accelerated timeline, but the idea is that it's happening and it's coming our way. So the idea behind this conversation is to figure out what we can do to be ready for electric vehicles, what we can do along the rail belt with the utilities to be prepared and be able to welcome kind of this new wave of energy, of transportation. So yeah, I'll just leave it at that, and I'll introduce our, we've got one presentation, and then we're gonna have a moderated panel discussion, and then we'll do a good question and answer session at the end of the night. So just hold questions to the end. And with that, I'll introduce our presenter and moderator, Shaina Kilcoyne. Shaina is the Energy and Sustainability Coordinator for the Municipality of Anchorage Solid Waste Services. She was a lead part of the Climate Action Plan and has been working on electric vehicles for a little while now. And yeah, I'll turn it over to Shaina.
So like Greg said, I'm the Energy and Sustainability Manager for the Municipality of Anchorage, and I'm based at Solid Waste Services. We're housing the kind of sustainability division for the municipality, and so Solid Waste Services is where you're going to see a lot of that energy come from. It really is a natural fit. Everything we do is related to sustainability as we work to extend the life of our landfill, and it's been really exciting being there. So why are we even talking about electric vehicles when we talk about climate change? Very clearly, you can see here 29% of our transportation is contributing to our greenhouse gas emissions. And in Anchorage, it's even more. We're looking at 53% of our emissions coming from highway motor fuels out of the whole piece of the pie. So the biggest place that we can make a difference is really in transportation. And that can be tough because we are wedded to our cars. Anchorage is pretty spread out and we're used to driving places. So we worked on a climate action plan last year, and we got the assembly passed that in May of this year. Can I see a show of hands for those of you who knew that Anchorage had a climate action plan? Oh, that's awesome. Really, really great. Yeah, this is really exciting. The municipality and Anchorage have tried a couple of times before to pass a climate action plan, and it always got thwarted. So this is a really exciting movement. We worked on this with the University of Alaska. They received a grant for the majority of the work. And this includes ways to reduce our contribution to climate change, reduce our emissions and pollution, and ways to adapt and prepare for those changes that we're already seeing that are due to climate change. Of course, this summer we saw record heat and wildfires, and if that's just a glimpse into our future, then we really need to work on reducing our impact and preparing for more heat and more wildfires. So we worked on 7 different sectors within the Climate Action Plan, and I'm only going to talk about land use and transportation, specifically what the municipality is doing in regards to electric vehicles and hybrids. So first of all, we're looking at our fleet. The municipality drives a lot of different vehicles during the day, and so we look at how can we finish our mission and save money for our taxpayers and save fuel. So one of the ways we're doing this is our police department just received 20 hybrid SUVs. So this was not a big decision. It just made economical sense when they looked at the savings in fuel that the police department is going to enjoy just by driving these. And in fact, out of this, these savings, most of it is from just idling. You see police cars all the time idling. They have to keep their equipment on. They have to be ready to go at all times. And so the majority of these savings are just from sitting and not even moving. It's actually really exciting. So we've got 20 of these, and each one is expected to save about 1,200 gallons of fuel every year. So if we just look at $3 a gallon over 6 years, each of these vehicles is going to be able to save about $23,000. And that's at $3 a gallon. So if prices go up, we'll be saving even more. We have a lot of vehicles within the municipality, and we're looking at where we can electrify, where we can save money. Electric vehicles are very efficient. So we look at our garbage trucks, and those are getting about 2.5 miles to the gallon. We've been trying to buy an electric garbage truck for a while now, and it's hard. It is an emerging technology. It's a big vehicle. It's also a loud vehicle. So if we can get an electric garbage truck, you will have to actually remember to take your trash out as opposed to hearing it come down the street and running outside, which I do regularly, to take your trash out. So there's lots of opportunities here. In fact, we also have an all-electric, it's the municipality's first all-electric vehicle, the Chevy Bolt. We've named it Sparkles. It's very shiny and pretty. And here it is charging at Anchorage Community Development Association's charging station. I don't know if you know that this is available, but it's at the garage on 7th and G. And when you pay to park in that garage, charging is free here. So it's really exciting. And so the municipality is looking at, okay, not just our fleet, but what else can we do? We see that electric vehicles are coming. What does that mean in regards to permitting? What does that mean in regards to planning and in regards to charging? So we're going to talk a lot about that tonight. Basically, the idea is that someday we'll be able to buy an electric vehicle in Anchorage and you'll be able to drive to Fairbanks. If you go to Fairbanks, you'll be able to drive to Valdez, you'll be able to drive to Homer and charge up along the way just like you do with gas. So I'm going to stop there for now. I did want to ask a couple of polling questions of you, and it almost makes me cringe to ask this, but if you'll take out your phone, this is an interactive poll that we're going to do, and if you could just go to menti.com, it will ask you to plug in a couple of numbers. There's a code here at the top. So you'll plug in 89, 83, 9. And I've only got a couple of these, so if you don't have a phone handy, this won't take long and you won't, I hope, feel left out. But this is just to try to get an idea of kind of who's in the crowd and who we're talking to today. The code again? So it's menti.com, MENTI, and then you put in 89, 83, 9. Is it popping up all right? Yes. I guess I assume that because you're here, that you want to own one. So it looks like the vast majority of us do not own an electric vehicle. Show of hands, do you want to own an electric vehicle? Thanks, Tony. Excellent. And Craig, do you want to go to the next one? So our next question, I think it's on the right. This one you put your name into, and then you'll have to push start the quiz. But your name's not going to show up, so don't worry about that. So go ahead and put in your response. On your phone, you'll see the question. How many models of EVs are currently in the United States? So just wondering what you think about the market for electric vehicles in the U.S. You've got a couple of options there in the quiz. Go ahead and fill out. Oh, that went really fast. Well, you guys answered fast. Okay. So we had most people answering that there are 12 models of electric vehicles. And in fact, there are 35 models available on the market today. And there's a couple of caveats there, but I wanted to put this one up because it shows that, we don't even know what all is out there, but there's a lot of options available. We know about the Tesla, we know about the Chevy Bolt, we know about the what's that other fancy one? The Audi, the Porsche. Yeah, we know about some of these, but there's actually quite a few. So there's a lot of options if you're not super excited about the ones that you've heard of. And then I've got one more question. This is going to be a word cloud, so I'm asking you to put in 1, 2, or 3 words about the biggest barrier you see to electric vehicle ownership. and it'll start popping up. The words will get bigger if more people put them in. Okay, so cost. This is good. Cost, range, and charging are really going to be the main ones. And that's pretty much the order that we thought that they would be in. Cost, I think people are thinking the initial cost of the vehicle. And then we're going to talk a lot about charging today, so I'm glad to see that up there. Okay, thank you for indulging me. I appreciate it. I'm going to introduce our guests now, and I don't know, you can do whatever you want with the. Okay. Thank you again for participating in that. We've got some really great people here today. Brian Hickey is the Chief Operating Officer for Chugach Electric. I was going to say Executive Officer for Chugach Electric Association. Julie Estey is the Director of Public Relations for the Matanuska Electric Association, and she actually just got back from a rate making for Emerging Technologies Conference, so I'm hoping that she can give us some innovative ideas on this. And then Dimitri Shein is the Executive Director of the Alaska Electric Vehicle Association. This is a new association, so if you haven't heard of it yet, he's now up and running, so he'll tell you about it. Each one of them are going to have about 3 minutes to talk about what they're interested in EVs is and what their organization is doing about it and what they're working on in regards to electric vehicles.
Yeah. At Chugach, I think we're excited about sustainability and about growing our load in a sustainable way. I always call it rule number one for an electric utility is to grow your load. When you grow your load, the cost per kilowatt hour goes down. And so we think electric vehicles in the future are going to be a significant sustainable load component for us. What we've done so far, we took a look at the market and we purchased a Chevy Bolt. We put together a plan in 2016, I think. We purchased a Chevy Bolt in 2017 and installed a charging station at Chugach to kind of understand, do electric vehicles work in the wintertime? Back then we weren't sure, will they get warm enough and how does all that work? So we've been driving our Chevy Bolt named Watson for the last couple of years. And now we've sort of moved to the next phase of our EV initiative, which is gathering data on charging stations and how they're actually used. We put together a program. We were seeking a co-op private partnership with with entities who are interested in installing a charging station at a hotel or a mall. We were seeking five participants that we would share the cost of installation with, and they would actually own the charging station. And then we would get data from it to find out how these charging stations are used, what's the actual, how often are they used, and what's the load that they actually draw. We installed our first one, I believe, on the 17th of September at Alyeska, at the hotel down at Alyeska, right near the tram. And we have four or five other people who are interested, and we're working through the details of putting those charging stations in. Once we get that put together, our intention is to try to understand, what's it really cost to put in a charging station, and how can we work to cooperate both regionally with the other utilities and in private partnerships with the cooperative in getting charging stations out, because we believe, I think what you saw on the screen there, the two primary drivers or the two primary challenges in electric vehicle adoption are going to be range anxiety and cost. And so we're kind of working both of those issues or challenges at the same time.
Thanks, Brian. I'm Julie Estey, Director of External Affairs for Matanuska Electric Association, and that includes both public relations and also our member service department. And actually the work that we're doing around electric vehicles is focused on my work with member service. We're very much seeing this as a member service. This is something that we've been hearing from our members that they're interested in. We've seen it coming from the lower 48 for years, and so how can we get ahead of this technology? I'll be the first to say I'm not an expert on electric vehicles. There's probably far more experts here in this audience, and there's a few of them. We've got Josh Kraft, who's our grid modernization manager, who's been doing a lot of work. If I need to phone a friend, he'll be my first call. And then we also have Ed Jenkin in the back. He's our director of power delivery, and so we're all working as a team to look at what this means for MEA. We've just spent the last few months surveying our members. It was an informal survey, not scientific, but we did it through Facebook with some incentives, and we found out pretty much what you guys showed us here. I mean, we have 52 of the 800 people who responded to our survey actually have electric vehicles. And the people who don't have them, the biggest concern is range anxiety, cost, and winter performance. So those are the same things we heard here. We're also just trying to figure out, as a member-owned cooperative, what MEA's role should be in this space and what our members want from us. How can we solve some of the problems, but what really is the role of a member cooperative? And as Shaina mentioned, I was down in a rate making, which is a total nerd town for people like me, but looking at how we can innovate and what are some rate designs around innovation in the utilities. So we talked about battery storage, net metering, and all kinds of things. But one of the things that was very stark to me there is we're kind of a different animal up here. We're cooperatives. A lot of the rate design principles that I heard at the conference were all investor-owned utilities. And there are different motivations, there's different levers that we have as a cooperative versus an investor-owned utility. One of the things we don't have are profits that we can use to invest in innovation. So what we have instead are very narrow margins that are owned by our members, and so we need to invest those very judiciously. The other thing that's different about a cooperative here in Alaska is that we're regulated. A lot of the cooperatives in the lower 48 are actually non-regulated because they have member-voted boards. And so the fact that we have a Regulatory Commission of Alaska that is also helping us make sure that the rates that we make are sound is another kind of different animal. So it's been interesting looking through our unique lens at the different options and realizing, again, the different levers that we have. And that's not to be said as any sort of excuse, but I think it's an important part of the conversation as we look at solutions, the options that we have. And really for MEA, as we look at what our role should be, we're looking at it through a lens of beneficial electrification. And a lot of you have probably heard that term. We're not out there trying to grow load and hawk like tanning beds and hot tubs. I mean, that's really not our goal as an electric utility. Our goal is with beneficial electrification, how we can offset energy costs used from non-electrical use towards electrical use that could be more efficient for our members.
Many of our members drove to Homer recently. I can drive to Fairbanks, and the issue is that not that can we make it to Fairbanks, it's just how painful and how much camping do you want to do while driving to Fairbanks. Something that normally in lower 48 or in Canada takes just half an hour charge, in Alaska would take an 8-hour charge because there is no charging infrastructure developed. And we want to partner with the utilities in a way that just to communicate what's needed, and we don't need any grand things, just a little bit of help to create the correct rate to allow for level 3 charging in the state of Alaska. And once we have the correct tariffs that reflect the reality of this new technology, and once they reflect the reality of how the technology is used, we can see private businesses step in, like Electrify America, Tesla, other business owners can buy and install fast chargers. So yeah, that is the basic idea of our organization, and we don't just focus on Anchorage or Matsu or Homer. Our idea is that we represent all EV drivers across the state of Alaska. We care about someone in Fairbanks being able to get in their car and efficiently, effectively, safely drive from Fairbanks to Homer in one day. Right now it would take 5 days, probably. but we want it to be one day, like a gasoline vehicle, because that's what an EV is designed to do. Current EVs have over 300 miles of range. It's very comparable to a gasoline vehicle, so if we simply install the correct chargers, which the state of Alaska has the money now from the Volkswagen settlement. So the money is there. We just need to correct some of these rates and make them reflect the current reality. And we can have amazing new technology that can grow everybody's load. And everyone will be happy, beneficially. So that's all I have. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, everyone. So we're going to do just some conversation up here, and then we'll open it up to questions in the crowd. And I wanted to kind of, Dimitri, you started talking about rates and tariffs, and I want to back up just a little bit. We've got a crowd who, a lot of them want to own EVs, but don't yet own them. And so some of these first questions are going to be probably more towards you. I'd like it if you'd talk just a little bit about what it's like to drive an electric vehicle, talk about handling and maintenance, and how you charge. If you could kind of start there, I think people would want to get an idea of that.
Okay, so I charge like for simple 220 plug, like for a dryer, for example. It's something like that. And I plug my cord into my plug, and it charges overnight. It usually if you want to go from 0 to full charge, it will take you overnight, probably 8 hours to charge all the way up. What's nice about an electric vehicle is that there is no exhaust. Like when my car is in the garage, I can just get my app and warm up my seats and get the temperature in there just right. And then I load up all the kids and I drive them to school just like any other car. That's pretty much it. The only difference is that you don't have to go to the gas station. So around town, if there is no challenge of, for example, I'll tell you an example of what it's like to drive to Homer. I drove to Homer last week, and I got up 2 in the morning, and I drove to a wonderful place there. It's called Brew at 602. I got there about 5 in the morning, and my battery was to 30%, and there's some level 2 chargers, which are not fast chargers. And because of the lack of fast chargers, I crawled into my car, and I slept in my car for 5 hours. And then I crawled out of my car and went and had some waffles at this wonderful coffee shop, and then I proceeded to drive to Homer. I got to Homer, and there was an event to open up a level 2 charger our organization was involved in installing. And after a couple of hours of mingling and giving test rides to everybody in the car, I headed back to Soldotna, and I got to Soldotna, and I plugged in to the charger again, and I crawled back in the car and went to sleep for 6 hours. And then I got up at 11, and I drove home, and I got home at 2 in the morning. So it was a 24-hour trip, which, having a correct, fast level 3 charger would cut that trip down to like by 11 hours. I could be home 11 hours earlier. I would not, and like it's a wonderful location, but there was some, like at nighttime, some kids pulled up, and I think they were like doing some kind of deals, and I got very nervous. I was like, is this how my life is going to end? And my electric vehicle in the back of it in fear. So this is why it's very important that we get level 3 charging in Alaska so people can enjoy their electric vehicles and just drive them like normal cars.
What would that trip have looked like if there were level 3 chargers on the highway?
Yeah, I would have left home, say, not at 2 in the morning. I would have left home because I had to be in Homer by 1. I would have left home, at 11 or so, maybe 10 in the morning. I would have got to Soldotna around, 1 or whatever. I would have charged for half an hour, and I would have proceeded to Soldotna. I would have charged on the way back for half an hour, and I would have been home by 6 in the evening, So yeah, that's why charging is important.
And so I'm wondering if, and Brian and Julie, I'll ask you to jump in here too. If you could talk about what it's like to drive an electric vehicle, how it handles, especially in the winter. I think a lot of people are wondering about that. There's still a lack of models with all-wheel drive for all electric vehicles. And then, what was the other thing I was going to ask? Maintenance. If you have an electric vehicle, Watson, and then Dimitri, what you've seen for maintenance. We know that there's less parts, and we've heard that there's less maintenance. So I'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, I've driven Watson around. It handles great. I'm amazed at how big this Chevy Bolt is. It doesn't look that big from the outside. And I'm a pretty big guy, but it's comfortable. The heater's great. It's instantaneous. Turn the heat on, and the car is warm. You don't have to wait for it to warm up. And it handles great. It accelerates faster than any vehicle I've ever owned, but I'm not a real fast vehicle kind of guy. I think it's great. It handles well on the snow. I don't believe, and I should have looked before I came down, how many miles we've got on it now. Any employee in the company can check it out and drive it around, so I'm not sure how many miles we have on it, but I don't believe we've done any routine maintenance on it at this point. So that was our experience with it.
Did you want to add any? You're good.
I see Watson at Coots sometimes. No, I'm just joking. No, I think like the thing is like it handles just like any other car. If you wreck your vehicle, it is probably a little bit more problematic to get replacement parts because there are lots of parts and they're not as readily available. So I think it would be probably like similar to wrecking like a premium vehicle here in town where they have to order parts. So that's one downside. Yeah.
And I'll answer for our Chevy Bolt. We've only got like maybe less than 4,000 miles on it, I think. It's been handling really well. The batteries are low, so it rides low, and the Chevy Bolt is very smooth, even in the winter. And we've had zero maintenance on it. We've had to take it in to get windshield wiper fluid. Yeah. And
Just to add, I mean, MEA does have a hybrid that we bought in like 2011 or 2012, and so it's a Chevy Volt. And I will say, I think what I will say about our Volt is that I think that the technology has come a long way. And so stories you may have heard about electric vehicles or hybrids back in the 2012 era, my understanding is things are moving along better. And I think that is some of the misperceptions that people have about electric vehicles are stories from some of the earlier models. Our battery is degraded significantly, but I've heard that they have solved that issue. And so don't base your perceptions on 2011, 2012. That's a long time ago now, even though it seems like just yesterday. I think that is one of the things that I would pass along.
I'm going to open this up. I'll prime it by saying that most electric vehicles are getting over 100 miles per charge now. The Chevy Bolt is 238 miles per charge. The Tesla Model S, I think, is like 330, around there. Three what? Oh, 370. Wow. Yeah. So everybody buy Teslas. So that being said, and I will say that you definitely lose range on cold days. You're using more of your battery to go towards heat, of course. So that being said, what are your thoughts on how many level 3 fast chargers we would need on the rail belt from Fairbanks to Homer?
I think you want to put them in probably every 30, 60, 70 miles. And I think we did a count on that, and it's in the 30 to 40 range, covers Anchorage to Fairbanks, Fairbanks to Homer, Anchorage to Glen Allen, Glen Allen to Valdez, Valdez to Fairbanks, Glen Allen to Fairbanks. So that's kind of I think the general range you're at.
Well, I heard Dimitri talk at the Clean Power Happy Hour. He said even if every utility put in one, it would be a significant difference. And I think, you can't assume that everybody starts at full charge at the same place. And so I think you do want some redundancy. I think also something to think about is at the outer edge of the service territories, the reliability, the grid isn't as redundant. And so we do need to consider that, for instance, if you want to put one at the far edge of MEA service territory going towards Fairbanks, which is the Kasuga Ken campground up on the Denali State Park, it's on a long radial line that's fed, back towards Talkeetna with lots of trees in between. And so you do want some redundancy in that charging system to make sure that when you pull up at an empty charge or low charge and you need to get to Cantwell at the next station, that there's some redundancy there. And so I think that is something that we want to consider as we're placing things around. Dimitri?
Yeah, I think it's the nice thing about Alaska is we're a big state, but our population is, especially all the EVs, all the people who would be driving the EV are would have Fairbanks, kind of Anchorage, Soldotna, Homer. So you can solve this lack of charging situation pretty rapidly and at very low cost. And again, there is already state funding available for these chargers. And again, level 3 chargers are more expensive, so they're like $50,000 a piece plus some additional transformers and things that would need to go in. But literally, if you put a fast charger at Healy, a fast charger in Willow, a fast charger in Anchorage, fast charger in Soldotna, you have just covered like 99% of the EVs. And so that is the good news, that we can solve this pretty rapidly with very little money and using probably some private funds as well. And for redundancy, you can have level 2 charging in between, which is just a basic 220 outlet would do. So it's not a very expensive problem to solve. It's not a very hard problem to solve because all of this has been invented. It's all being used effectively. And what prevents some of this happening are some fixed costs, which we will get into, I suppose, the demand charges and so forth, or what it will take to operate a level 3 charger on a consistent basis.
Well, let's just jump into that. We've heard that level 3s are really the crux of kind of opening up the road system, but we refer to demand charges as one of the barriers. And I don't want to assume that everybody knows what a demand charge is. That would be crazy. So can you talk about, and maybe Julie, Brian, this would be good for you to talk about how that works and what the barrier is there, why demand charges are an issue when it comes to fast chargers.
So on the Chugach system, fast chargers are sort of in that 200 to 300 kW range, kilowatt peak demand range, which puts it into what we would call our large general service commercial class. That particular class of customer for Chugach, and I think for the other utilities, has a demand charge. And the idea behind a demand charge is that we build out the electric system to serve that load for its peak demand, but that peak demand only occurs relatively infrequently during the year. And so the cost for constructing that facility that meets maybe your peak that occurs an hour or two a year has to be recovered somehow. And we recover that through a charge that's associated with your demand as opposed to the actual energy you use. And demand. So that's what a demand charge is. On the Chugach system, a large general service demand charge is about $22 per kW. So if you used 2 kW, which is your peak for that month, then you would pay the $44 charge, a demand charge for that. I know Commissioner Scott's here, and I think there's been some talk of creating some sort of a workshop where the Road Belt group could come together and talk about ways that we could perhaps adjust that for electric vehicle charging stations and make an exception for that. I don't think it's a big financial issue for the utilities, but what it is an issue related to the fact that under Alaska statutes, electric rates have to be just and reasonable. And so we can't it's difficult to make an exception for a specific member of a customer class without making it for all the members in that customer class. And that's an issue that we would have to work through with the commission. And so I think that's where we're at on demand charges.
Yeah, for MEA, I think the other thing to understand about demand charges is about level 3 chargers, is that you need 3-phase power, which is more of the backbone of the system rather than kind of the long, the 2 lines versus 3 lines that you may see out there. So it takes a specific kind of infrastructure. So I think that's something to understand. With the demand charges and talking to folks down in the lower 48 about how they're handling it, there are places where they do demand forgiveness or demand holidays, and so I think there's some flexibility. In the MEA service territory, we are not impacted. We're primarily residential load. We're not impacted as greatly by the large commercial users, and so our demand charges are actually lower. Our demand charge is more around $8, and so for us, a member may, like, say 3 Bears wanted to put level 3 charging stations through their MEA service territory. It would cost them a couple $100 a month, and that might be worth it because they may say, hey, if while you're charging, you're going to come in and buy some chips and some who knows what. 3 Bears has a lot of stuff, and so that it'd be worth it for them. But throughout the other utilities, those demand charges are necessarily different, and so I think the option to talk to the RCA about options. There's other places in the lower 48 that are doing demand charges focused on beneficial electrification. So that's where they stipulate that holiday is if you are providing a service to your members that allows them to reduce their entire energy charge, EVs, battery storage, heat pumps is another one, then those demand charges get instigated. And so these are all really interesting conversations that I think we are all ready to have to try to solve this issue.
So I guess I'll just explain how this demand charge issue affects a fast charger. So a lower end level 3 fast charger for an EV is 50 kilowatts. That's the lower end. That's like 5 years ago model. That's being replaced. But if we were to, for example, put this in Anchorage in Chugach territory, and that charger comes on for 15 minutes, you take 50 kilowatts, and it comes on only for 15 minutes in a month, just 15 minutes in a month. You multiply 50 times 20 or 21 or something like that, and it's over $1,000 for that charger being on for 15 minutes. So that's where we start talking about, well, what's reasonable? What's really happening here? Is this 15 minutes really fair? Is it really impacting Chugach, or sorry to pick on Chugach, Homer Electric that much? So that's where we start talking about these demand charges. MEA is better. MEA is just around $10 or something, 9 something. So 50 kilowatts comes on, it's about $400 for 15 minutes. So that's where it becomes, it's still an issue, like $400 for 3 Bears and Healy. Like, they're gonna say, we're gonna pay $400 a month for a customer to charge one time. Like, that's how many EVs we get through Healy, maybe 1, 2, 3. And we're going to pay $400. There's no way we're going to recoup this $400, and that's what prevents 3 Bears from putting in a charger. So our proposal would be pretty simple. Like, for example, for like MEA has no demand charges on their single-phase service. So I can hook up 5 level 2 chargers, 10 kilowatts each, and draw 50 kilowatts, no problem. So why is it a problem to hook it up to a 3-phase and draw the same 50 kilowatts? So like, it would be great if MEA would see it our way, the EV drivers and the, people who want to commute using their EV vehicles, and just say, how about we create a tariff or a rate that says, for 50 kW, limited to 1,000 kilowatt hours, that's about 20 hours of EV charging with no demand charge. It's very similar to a single-phase service. It seems reasonable. It's limited. And once you go over that 1,000 kilowatt hours, the commercial rates kick in. And the same analysis could be done for Chugach Electric and Golden Valley, for example. They're up to 50 kW already. So in theory, it would actually be okay to put a charger, lower end charger in Healy with no demand charges. So that's just some ideas.
I would echo what Julie said. I think these are discussions that Chugach is ready to have, MEA is ready to have, and I think the commission has to be in the room in that discussion, because those rates are going to have to be approved by the commission. And so I know that Commissioner Scott's in the back, and I'm sure he's taking notes. So anyway, I think we're ready to have those discussions.
There's not like a single level 2 charger, anything like from Anchorage to Talkeetna. And I have made it my mission to call every single business along the roadway and offer them a free charger with installation. There's not a single business that has taken me up on that offer. So, and demand charges come up, and the cost of electricity comes up. Even crazy things like people say, well, if somebody electrocutes themselves, come up. So there is a lot of education and a lot of work that needs to be done before we have competition. Like, you can see competition happening in Anchorage, but just along the way to Fairbanks, it's going to be problematic.
And I know Tesla was up here just this week talking about they are very motivated to help us get our charging stations up and going, and even offering free charging stations. I mean, as far as the equipment, they only serve Teslas, so that's a limitation. But I think it's starting, and that's the exciting thing that we see is it's starting. And hearing in the lower 48, people talk about there's a whole culture around charging. There's like dog parks where you go exercise your dog and charge up, and the bookstores over here, and it's happening down in the lower 48. Of course, most things happen a little faster there with the population, but we're definitely ready to have those conversations. As Shaina mentioned, she's been bringing together a group of utilities and other stakeholders around how do we start moving down this path. There's funding available through a VW settlement fund that AEA will hopefully soon release that we can start utilizing. So we are actively trying to help our members solve this problem.
I think if you look at it, if you kind of break the challenge down into a couple parts, you have the cost associated with resolving the range anxiety. There's things that utilities can do directly to the point of working on our tariffs. There's a tariff related to, Chugach has a tariff tariff number 7 that says that we can't sell people cannot sell electricity that they buy from us. And I believe that's because there's an Alaska statute that requires that. There's some changes that have to be made there, or you can go to a different way of solving that problem where maybe you have a flat rate for up to so many kilowatt hours of charging, and then another flat rate if you use more, and a flat rate above that, kind of like you do with your data plan for GCI. But there are things that we can do directly, but there's also a lot that we can do working with other utilities and stakeholders collaboratively. And I think Julie's point, the Road Belt Group is, I think, going to try to develop a regional plan to install these chargers, and hopefully we can use some of that VW settlement money to do that. And so I think there's educating our members or things that we can work collaboratively with other stakeholders and utilities to get some of that education out there, because cooperatives are one of the 7 cooperative principles is member education. So I think there's stuff that we can do along there.
Yeah, and I'm going to reiterate what one of you cooperatives said in the beginning, which is that cooperatives can't develop a rate that is special. They can't give somebody a discount without offering it to everybody. And so their concern is if they eliminate or reduce those demand charges, they need to make sure that other people are not paying the difference. And I think that's great. And then the other piece of this is that electric utilities will also, if you put in fast chargers, people are going to still do 90+% of their charging at home. And so the utilities, you're going to be able to sell more kilowatt hours, which is also good. So I think there's hopefully a sweet spot that we can find there that benefits everyone. I wanted to move on because we only have a few more minutes before we run to Q&A. And we had a couple of questions about the utilities' role in not just these demand rates, but what about any other incentives? Or you can go back to rates, of course, if you want. But I know Julie's been thinking about this, and Dimitri had a couple of questions about this. There's a lot of different structures in the lower 48 to help members meet their desire to have electric vehicles and drive along the grid. So I'm hoping you could just chat a little bit about that and what you see your role is.
Well, I think, that is one of the questions we're trying to ask. As Shaina said, as we look at, we have margins that belong to our members and how those are able to be spent. One group can't be subsidizing another group. And so we need to be very judicious and creative in how we make this happen so that anything that we do shows benefit to the rest of our members. And I know one thing that's been brought up to me a lot is time of use rates. Can we do time of use rates? Why isn't that happening here? And I think that's definitely something we should look at again. MEA just did a rate case a few years ago, and because of the new generation suite on the rail belt, because we are sharing power more amongst ourselves, there's very little change in, we talk in heat rates, but in the cost of producing power during different times of day at this point. And that doesn't mean that there may not be now. That doesn't mean that there aren't other benefits other than just heat rate, as far as reducing peaks around maintenance, around new generation, the next build out of new generation around gas aggregation. So there's some things that definitely need to be worked at. But as I was listening to the folks at the utility conference this week, one thing that my eyes were opened at is that most of the time with time of use rates, yes, the off-peak rate is lower, but the on-peak rate is higher. And so that's doing more of a cost-based rate. So it's not just that you get a discount if you charge at night. It's that if you use power during the peak hours, you're also paying more. Like there was the Colorado utility, it was 3.5 to 1. Most of them are 2 to 3.5. So their off-peak rate was 8 cents, but they were paying 28 cents during on-peak. And to me, 28 cents in Colorado just seemed shocking. But so it's a good conversation to have, but I think we need to have that conversation with our eyes wide open. It means that we're shifting more towards rates that are very much more focused on what the costs are to make that power during that time. Right now, it's more of an average. We take our total revenue requirement to make the power divided by the kilowatt hours that we expect to have, and that's the rate that we propose to the RCI. I mean, that's very oversimplified, but a time of use rate would adjust that, and that comes with benefits, but it also comes with trade-offs. And I think as we have that conversation, that's just something to keep in mind. It's not this kind of golden egg that is ripe for the taking. It's going to take some conversation and some real understanding of what that means.
Yeah, I think what I just like to add is that when the street light was invented, the electric utilities took notice, and I was just looking at the rates. There's like 10 tariffs for a street light. There's like a street light with a wooden pole, street light with a metal pole, so there's like 10 different tariffs for a street light. So electric vehicles are a big deal, and what's happening now, they're getting pushed into categories that they're not. They're not a large commercial service. The overall load on the system is very small. It's intermittent, and if we really analyze what it is, I'm sure we can come up with a rate that allows for us to have level 3 charging, fast charging on the system at rates that don't prevent installation of charging infrastructure in the state of Alaska.
And from MEA's perspective, I mean, Dimitri has excellent points. Right now we're working with our current structure because that's what we have. And that's why we need to start having these conversations and doing the analysis and making decisions with eyes wide open about all the costs and benefits of what we're doing. But and he makes excellent points because that's what we're doing. We're force fitting into what we currently have. So we're looking forward to extending and expanding that conversation.
So I've been directed to move to questions from the audience, which I'm really excited about. And I don't know if, Greg, you want to help with the microphones? If you have a question, just raise your hand. You got it?
My question is regard to the three large businesses, the city and the two utilities. Could you please state the number of vehicles that you use and the percentage of vehicles that will have a plug-in capability for each of the 5 years between 2020 and 2040? With regards to the city of Anchorage, they've been, since the load will be shifting from vehicle pollution to electrical production, electricity production, or is the city going to continue its vehement opposition to wind power when Chugach takes over supply of the power supply, or will it support purchase of more power, wind power from Siri? And with regards to the EV, dude, how about do those offers of free installations include metering so that the commercial operation can charge the EV user for the power they consume?
So that was a lot. I'll start, and I'll try to be quick here. I'm going to stick to EVs as much as I can. We are looking at our fleets. We drive a lot of vehicles. What I'm doing right now in our office, we're trying to do an assessment of what vehicles we have in the municipality so we can start to identify what ones it makes sense to switch over to electric, where will we save money and reduce emissions. I'm going to push it to Brian on the emissions. These have no tailpipe emissions, but they do use more electricity than you would otherwise use, so we need to account for that as well. And I believe Sean Scaling, I believe he said 60% reduction in the electricity emissions versus combustible engines, our traditional cars. So we're looking at a pretty big reduction. Is that correct?
Yeah, I would say that's correct. You know, we primarily generate electricity with natural gas-fired combustion turbines, and they're. I'm sorry, currently we generate most of our electricity, about 80% of it, with natural gas-fired combustion turbines, and they are considerably more efficient than internal combustion engines, and that number is somewhere between 40 and 60% that you pick up. So you do reduce emissions significantly. We also operate those in combined cycles, so we use the waste heat out of the stacks of those gas turbines to fire steam turbines, so we get more electricity out of them. So they're, and then we have hydroelectric, which obviously has zero emissions. So we have, and the wind power. So it is a much more efficient way to run the system. And there were a lot of questions in that. Oh, the fleet. So we are looking at electric vehicles. You know, there aren't a lot of SUV type electric vehicles, larger than SUVs. I'm sorry, I'm talking. Yeah, I'm saying there are some of those in our fleet, but a lot of our fleet are larger, more heavy equipment, which isn't in that realm right now. However, going back to what's happening right today at Chugach, we've put our fleet acquisition on hold until the acquisition of Municipal Light and Power is complete, so that we can kind of look at the two fleets and understand what they have and what we have and what we need to actually replace. But in that 2021 budget, we will be looking at the ability to replace some of those smaller vehicles that we use with electric vehicles.
And at MEA, we only have 2 or 3 that are really just kind of a pool of transit vehicles that we can use. Most of what we use are trucks, and I definitely have, especially these 2 guys, eyeing the rumored F-150 and the rumored Tesla pickup truck that's supposed to be announced towards the end of the year. So we'd love to understand what those are and their capabilities. I mean, since we are a critical infrastructure, we need to have the vehicles that are able to go where we need them to go. But we're really excited about what we're hearing, especially about the F-150s. So more to come on that. But currently, we know nothing about like the large bucket trucks, which is really what does a lot of our mileage between pickup trucks and the bucket trucks. So more to come as the technology improves. And I think you had a question for you.
I was just going to add, how cool would it be if MAA had like a big electric monster truck, and Chugach had Watson and Sparkles, but MAA is like cruising around. Yeah, that would be awesome. About the chargers. So what we do is we get you a free charger. It's a level 2 charger. We pay for the installation, we fundraise, and we pay the installation. So typically, you're looking at a $3,000 to $5,000 property improvement. Now, if you're in Wasilla or Talkeetna, any place, you can maybe somebody will come and charge for an hour passing through town. So you're looking at maybe at $10 of electricity. So for you to install like a billing system and credit card reader and so forth, and like, you know, it's going to cost you like $400 in service fees just to operate the darn thing. So there's no meter. People come in, plug in. If you want, put up a sign says, "You like my charger, give me a tip," and have a tip jar. And that will be like far more money than anyone will ever use out of that thing, because generally no one's going to use a level 2 charger unless they absolutely have to. No one is going to drive to Wasilla, park there for 8 hours, sleep in the car just to get $5 of electricity. You know, it's not something that happens. So that's why we skip the whole billing metering part.
Thank you. My name is Tom Harris. I'm CEO of a village corporation in the Valley. We placed a micro-combined heat and power system in our building. And as a result, we've been able to reduce our electrical costs for the building by about 90%. And to give you an example, that took a utility bill in February from $4,500 a month to $200 a month. We're now looking to put in chargers for our members, but we're looking for guidance on how to do that. And if we did do that, would we be running in violation of utilities if we were to sell that utility or that charge to our guests? So that's a question for the panel. How does a private enterprise where we have our own generation system, and for discussion purposes, our cost of gas for the year went up $500. Our savings were in the $36,000 range.
I believe, so I'm not a lawyer, and I'm not a regulatory person, so but I know that under 4205-381, the definition of a public utility is an entity that owns plant and uses it to distribute electric energy. And I believe that there may be, you would want to look into whether you would be regulated as a public utility in doing that. I'd want to know that answer if I were you. I know that on the Chugach system, we have a tariff that prohibits you buying electricity from us and selling it to someone else if your meter was installed after February 1st, 1973. What's important about that date, I don't know. But I believe that there is a statute that prohibits, in 4205, that prohibits the sale of resale of electric energy by non-utilities. But that's something that you'd want to research if you were going to do that. I can't tell you the answer to that, but that's a question that I would want to get an answer to. Well, I think you could charge a person a flat fee to park in a place and plug in. You can't sell them kilowatt hours of electricity. You could charge them $50 to park there for an hour, but I think you couldn't meter them and sell them electricity, but I believe that's the case.
Yeah, so the answer is just charge them for parking. Charge them for parking per hour or whatever. So figure out what it's costing you in electricity per hour, and then charge them for parking per hour. Call it an awesome EV spot, and just charge for that. Charge for parking per hour.
Well, thank you so much. And at our house, the meter goes both ways. We've got solar panels, and that was kind of the reason we did that was because we're going to get the electric car. We've now had the Leaf for a year. And so I just wanted to mention that for 3 months, our electric bill was $15 a month. And so that's driving for free. And the other thing that I really thought just lately, you know, thinking about possible volcano, I don't drag in any air to burn.
Can I add a question to that? Can you guys, the utilities, talk about vehicle to grid stuff? Have you guys thought about that? Have you looked into that? And what's the possibility of that coming online?
Oh, I'll just say I wouldn't want, if I have a electric vehicle, I wouldn't want my battery degraded with back and forth charging. I don't think it's wise. Other people might have other opinions, but generally, people buy an electric vehicle for purposes of driving, and I think there's other solutions like power walls and etc. that could be used just as effectively or better. But I will let utility folks explain.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of opportunities to look at. I think what I heard down from other folks in the lower 48 was that they're really looking at that more for batteries, battery walls, batteries, and having access to those instead of their personal vehicles. But I think, you know, the technology is just on the horizon, and so there's a lot of options. But what I have heard is very similar to yours. A lot of the people that are driving EVs in MEA service territory are also net metering members, and so they're using some of that excess solar or wind, primarily solar in our service territory, to also fill their vehicle up. So it's definitely a common thing, and I think part of that is just those folks are naturally early adopters. Those folks are naturally looking at innovation and how and very active in their electric bill. I mean, a lot of folks are also some of our lowest users because they're very active in how they manage their bill, but it's definitely common.
I think from a system perspective, once electric vehicles are adopted as the majority of vehicles out there, so there's a lot of batteries out there, there's a place for some sort of a rate, much like an interruptible rate that you might have with a large industrial customer, where you might use that. If you had the two-way communications to each of those locations, you might be able to use that battery capacity and provide those people who choose to let you use that battery capacity at certain times. You could actually create some sort of a system battery out of it. But I think that's way down the road. We've got to get enough batteries out there to actually make that a viable thing, and then you have to have the communications, high-speed two-way communications to make that functional. But I think there's probably a future there.
I'd add that I'm pretty excited about this. I think it's really cool. Why not use the battery when you're not driving to charge or put it into your building or whatever you're doing? And so I'm curious about a potential pilot project to park a car and be able to predict when your facility is going to hit its peak load and push in energy at that point to shave your peak and reduce your energy charges. I don't know if it's going to happen or be possible, but I'm pretty excited about it.
Hello. So you talk about the garbage truck scenario. In 17-18, we piloted a bus in Anchorage, and I thought that the pilot was to prove that buses can work inside the city, but we since handed it back over due to being able to recharge it. I'm just curious as to if we move down that route, obviously the city needs to come up with a way to continue moving these vehicles, especially the garbage trucks. What is the plan, or if there is one?
Great question. The pilot bus project, it was a pilot, so it was meant to only be 4 months during the winter. And I think we kind of got what we expected. It operated less than a diesel vehicle because it had to come back and be charged in the winter. And the problem there is that we have buses that run 18 hours a day, and so you can't have a part of your fleet running for 8 to 12 hours a day. That's a problem for us if we're not charging among the route. We're looking at charging along the route, but that gets very expensive. For the garbage truck, that's much easier actually. Our routes are much smaller. Everybody that we talk to, the route is not the limiting factor. They are all like, oh, your territory is small, we can do this. And our garbage truck drivers even come back for an hour for lunch and can charge up, but that's not the limiting factor. It's just getting a truck. Everybody wants them. There's not many out there yet. They want to sell us 10 at a time. We're not going to do that. So yeah, it's the bus pilot was good to inform us on this, but if anything, it encouraged us, even if we're not ready to go for buses.
Yeah, hi. This is for Julie and Brian. Are MEA and CEA looking at developing any on-bill financing options for homeowners who want to make these investments in their house?
Well, the on-bill financing is now an option through, and I can't remember which piece of legislation did that. The number, you might know it. Rafa, come on, you legislative nerd. You know the number. No, but that was just passed a few years ago, making it an option. And it's for energy efficiency and renewable. I'm not sure how it translates to EVs, but it's definitely something worth looking at. It just became available, so yeah, it's definitely something to look at.
I think at Chugach we've considered that, but we really don't want to be in competition with our credit unions and banks. If there were a need out there and the membership desired that to happen, obviously we'd take a hard look at it. But I think we looked at it and thought, well, we've got 8 credit unions and they're all co-ops, and we don't want to go out and take their business away. And then there's a bunch of banks as well. So I think that's kind of where we came down on that, but it isn't something that couldn't be revisited.
It'd be neat if you could do like a statewide or a rail belt one where you're still working with private banks, but the funding is rolling through you and the risk is reduced because their energy bill goes down so they save money, and also people pay their energy bills.
Just to add to that, we did do on-bill financing years and years ago for like electric appliances or something, back in the 80s. And at that time, it was an issue for some of our members or some of our, lending members that we were in competition. We found at that time that we could not do the process of loaning as efficiently, and so it was actually costing a little bit more. And the folks that were coming to us that were the ones that could not get loans through other places, and so they tended to be higher risk, and so it ended up costing our membership more. That was an experience back in the 80s. I'm sure there's ways to manage that differently now, but they're all things to talk about in the equation.
Hi, I'm Very DeSuvro with ACPERG. I'm hoping you or maybe someone from AEA in the audience could talk about when the funding from the VW settlement will be dispersed to fund these projects. Thank you.
I don't know if we have anyone from AEA, but I can answer it. So there is Alaska Energy Authority, our state's energy authority, got $8.125 million in the Volkswagen Settlement Fund. Bit of background, I forgot to talk about this. I had a slide on it and I didn't talk about it. Volkswagen cheated on their emissions testing, and so as a result of the settlement, each state got money for it. Alaska Energy Authority divvied it up, and basically our road system is going to get $950,000 in grant money for charging infrastructure. And that's why we're getting together and saying, well, we need a plan. You're asking about when that's coming out? I don't know.
So yeah, so they're supposed to like someone or like everyone I talk to is working on a plan for this, and somehow all these plans get wrapped into that one magical perfect plan. And once we have that perfect plan, some of the money gets dispersed, or I don't know how it's going to go. So the issue with that is that we can make this perfect plan, like, oh, everyone says, well, it'd be great to have a supercharger in Cooper Landing, but like when you start actually asking people, there is no one in Cooper Landing who wants to put a charger there. So, so the issue is that it'd be ideal if this money would start coming out for available projects, but it's not coming out, and no one knows when.
And we did just talk to a representative from Alaska Energy Authority yesterday and really urge them to come up with a plan. It's definitely something that's a priority for us. We've been talking a lot about it. I think, you know, there was a changeover with some leadership with the administration, and I think that's probably caused a few delays as well. But we hope with our urging that it'll happen sooner rather than later. And maybe with your urging, if you'd like to urge Alaska Energy Authority.
They're working on it. I think they keep trying to find the best plan. Yep.
Yeah, Shaina, on those new electric police vehicles here, so did the city build a bunch of charging stations in order to keep those cars going? Did the city build some charging stations to keep those new police cars going?
The police cars are hybrid, so they still run on gasoline, but they do have an electric motor, and so they save energy. You don't have to plug that one in. Our electric vehicle Sparkles, you do have to plug in, and we're just using a 220, and we just plug it in at the lot. So those aren't public charging stations.
Did you see a difference when you did the bus testing with the cold weather? Does that have effect on how long the charges hold on the cars or anything like that?
The cold weather did affect the bus and how long it would operate. They kept bringing it back at about 20%, and it ran anywhere, I want to say this was a year and a half ago, I want to say 8 hours to, I think like 15. I can't remember if it ran a full 18. I should know that. But the cold weather was the biggest impactor. It had to heat the cabin off the battery.
All right, so for those of you who don't know me, I'm Colleen Fisk, the Education Director at REAP, and I find this really fascinating. Of course, I want my own electric vehicle, obviously. I just drove down to Homer and back for an education outreach, and I would love if I could do that in an electric vehicle and not have to get up at 2 a.m. to do that. And I'm curious, a couple of you mentioned about misconceptions that are going on, and I'm curious like what you're thinking about education. What are the major misconceptions that you're seeing about electric vehicles? What can I do to help with that education outreach around misconceptions? Anybody who'd like to share on that? Thank you.
Yeah, so as I said, a lot of the misperceptions are around how they handle winter, how they handle the snow. So one of the things we did was just let our members speak for themselves. So we did 4 videos with different folks answering these exact kind of questions. That's on our YouTube and our online as well on our website. There was a transportation fair for the Matsu. We had one of our members bring their Tesla there, so people were able to sit in it, learn about it from somebody who was actually driving a Tesla, see how comfortable it was. There was little kids playing video games on the screen. They were very excited about that feature. So we're just starting our education campaign on it. Again, our goal is just really to educate members about the questions that they have, and so we're just getting that started. But I think it's definitely an important factor.
I think it would be great, like at the beginning of Shaina's presentation, she said that more than 50% of greenhouse emissions come from combustion engines now. And folks see climate change happening, and they're worried and concerned, and they ask what they can do. And, you know, installing a charger, electric vehicle charger, is like the coolest thing you can do to fight climate change. So that's why I think folks should, get involved in installing electric vehicle chargers, like one in Wasilla, Wasilla would be good. Wasilla, yeah. Yeah, so I think like it's like a tangible thing you can do to make things better, to speed up this kind of transition towards electric vehicles. And the electric vehicles are great to drive, and they perform just as good as a gasoline vehicle, or better at times.
to add on, I mean, I think I highlighted winter driving and things, but really when you look at why our members who own the electric vehicle, the 52, decided to, it was economics. And I think helping people understand the economics through those case studies is another big part of education.
I wanted to add that we're also working on a ride and drive event. So we're working with, the municipality's working with Matanuska Electric Association, Municipal Light and Power, and we want people to get out and be able to drive them. Because if you haven't driven them, it's a really cool opportunity. You see how they handle. So that helps with some of the misconceptions. We don't have that information yet, so we're working on it. The kindergartners cannot drive it.
One thing I wanted to mention about the charging is I understand that in several charging stations outside and stuff, they use used EV batteries to store electricity, so they don't have that peak, so they don't need the demand charge. It just but they do have to pay for batteries up front before that. So anyway, just wanted to mention that.
And there actually is a charging provider that's working with Launch Alaska that has storage in addition to the direct charge. And so we've been talking to them about the possibility of what a pilot could look like in our service territory.
I think we have time for maybe one more question. Last one.
What percentage increase are you anticipating needing to provide for the electrical generation, and what plans are you making to either implement that in terms of your power generation or your grid capacity to transmit that additional power, and to provide clean power for the additional power over the next 10 or 20 years?
I think that at this point, we've run some preliminary numbers, and in the near term, it would take a significant 10 or 15% penetration into the auto market in Alaska would result in a 7 or 8% increase in our load. That's probably reasonable in the next 5 or 6, 7 years. And those are not hard numbers. Those are kind of I did some back of the envelope calculations. We just completed reconstructing the generation fleet in Alaska. Virtually all the utilities have new generation, and we sized capacity into that for load growth. So I would say that EV load growth isn't developed enough for us to integrate that into wasn't developed at the time to integrate it into that plan. And the next tranche of generation will probably be built 15 or 20 years from now, and so we'll just have to monitor it as it goes along. And obviously, if it exceeds capacity, we'll accelerate those plans and bring in more generation. But it sort of this falls right at the beginning of a generation cycle, electrical generation cycle.
And I think right now, each of the utilities is actually seeing mostly declining load growth due to either energy efficiency or weather, and I think we're still trying to define the different components of that. MEA is actually seeing an increase or almost flat, a little bit of an increase in our load, but that's primarily because we're still adding new members. We're experiencing a period of growth. But our typical member used to use 696 kilowatts, and now they're using 650. And so we've seen the per member load decline. And so it's something that from a load perspective, again, it depends on the penetration of vehicles. As Brian said, we've just all built gas-fired, more efficient generation. But we are still open and negotiating constantly with independent power producers. And so while it may not make sense for MEA to build anything new, it does make sense if somebody can produce the power cheaper for us to buy it from them. And so that doesn't incur any additional capital costs to our members, but it allows us to reduce costs. And so part of it will depend on independent power producers and the market and what kind of costs and economics they can bring, but we're absolutely open to the entrance of economic renewable power.
And just to add to what Julie said, I think on the Chugach system, we've seen a 10% decline in load over the last 7 or 8 years. Primarily, we believe due to LED lighting, which is really kind of nerdy, but it's a phenomenal change when you take something that used to consume 60 or 70 watts and it now consumes 10 or 15. That's almost unheard of as a technological advancement. But we've seen quite a decline over the years. So, we see this as a way to stabilize load. And like MEA, our meter count is growing, but our load has been declining. And I think our average customer used to consume 750 kW, the average monthly consumption, and now we're at 550. So it's been a significant decline over the last few years.
We use 200. Are we wrapping up, Greg?
Yeah, I think that's about it. Thank you all for coming out tonight. A reminder, October 24th is our next event. It'll be on the 4th floor here. And yeah, thank you to our panelists. Let's give them all a big round of applause.